Good morning, Bongi. Thanks very much for joining us here in Harare. There's a little bit of a breeze, but it's a lovely Sunday morning. And it's usually quiet, but I think it's even quieter because Zimbabweans have gone to holiday spots, given the two public holidays that are kicking off tomorrow and Tuesday, Heroes Day and the Zimbabwe Defense Forces Day. But I am joined by two people that are very interested in the media, one a media practitioner and another one that monitors. But just before I introduce them, just to let you know that we did reach out to the public broadcaster, the SABC, as well as the biggest state-owned media newspaper, the Herald, to join us. But unfortunately, we couldn't get much success there. But let me introduce my guests, Patience Zirima, who's the director at Media Monitors Zimbabwe, and Foster Dongozi, who's the Secretary General of the Zimbabwe Union of Journalists. To both of you, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
Morning, and thank you.
All right, let me start with you, Patience, because you've had an opportunity to monitor the media over a period of time, various media, print, online and television, particularly in the election period. What are the big trends and the things that you observed?
Generally, there has been very unfair and balanced coverage, especially of the different political parties. If you look at how the media has been covering the main political parties, ZANU-PF, MDC, they get the majority of coverage. You'll see that generally throughout the period, there is over 80% coverage of these two big political parties and very little on the very smaller political parties. So that is one of the biggest issues that we're seeing. However, there is the lion's share was obviously given to the ruling party, ZANU-PF, and much more to the incumbent Emmerson Mnangagwa. So there was so much more coverage of the ruling party and their candidate, their presidential candidate. And we found that even when you're looking at political adverts, they were dominated by ZANU-PF. Over close to 98% of all adverts in the print and broadcast media was on Emmerson Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF, so this was quite a big challenge. However, you'll find that when we look at, there were differences in terms of coverage in the print media and broadcast media as well. In the print media, the Herald and the Zim Papers publications definitely were covering the ruling party much more. 80% plus of their coverage was on the ruling party. The private media was quite more balanced, although you'll find an interesting trend was that ZANU-PF and Emmerson Mnangagwa even got the highest amount of coverage in those private media as well. So this was quite interesting for us. Yeah.
All right. So you're a journalist, and you've worked on both sides of the fence, private and the state media. And I wonder, from a journalist point of view, why was it that if you could pick up a newspaper and look at the headlines, you can almost tell which was state media, which was independent? As much as people might say the state media was captured by the state, it looks as if some people could say that the independent media was captured by the opposition.
Yes, thank you. And that is a very correct observation. But the thinking amongst many journalists, particularly in the private media, is that if the public media is going to write just about anything and everything about the ruling party, stroke government, then somebody needs to tell the other side of the story. That has been the thinking. But going forward, there's been a realization, particularly from the private media, that beyond taking sides with the opposition, there's a genuine need for professionalism, and this they've really tried. Of course, there's also the stick that comes with getting advertisements from public institutions and so on. Although that has not been said publicly, but I'm aware that in some countries, particularly in Africa, in Southern Africa, threats to withdraw advertising, including licensing, by the way, has always been like the sword that hangs over some publishers. So hence the need to sort of try and move towards the middle of the line, as opposed to continuing to be perceived to be on the side of the opposition.
Patience, talk to me a little bit about the tone and the quality of the journalism that you observed over time.
Tone of coverage. I think generally there's been coverage has been very neutral, very professional in terms of how the media has been presenting issues. But of course, we look at pretty much, if it's a news bulletin, it's the whole bulletin. A newspaper, the whole newspaper. It's very different if you look at the front page coverage alone. If you look at the front page coverage alone, it's been you'll find that a lot of stories are very insightful on both sides of the divide, whether it's by the ruling party or opposition political parties, and how these are perceived by the different media houses. You find if you pick up a state-owned or state-controlled publication, it's usually very positive on the ruling party, very negative on the opposition. If you pick up a private media, a private publication, the opposite is true. Very negative around the ruling party, quite positive around the opposition. However, you find that with as what Foster was saying, the coverage of opposition is not always positive all the time. There's a lot of criticism for both sides, whether it's the opposition, whether it's the state. But I would say that if you look at holistically, what we noted was that outside the front page itself, there was quite a lot of neutrality, a lot of balance, but the front pages are something.
So the front page was to sell the paper?
Yes, it needs to sell the paper, which I suppose that's why you find that there is a lot of insightfulness. There needs to be some kind of sensationalism sometimes that sells just by the headline, and sometimes the story itself might not even be what you find in the headline.
All right, so take us back in time, Foster, and how far has the life of the journalist gone? There was a time when journalists' lives were threatened, some died, there was continual harassment. Have things changed?
Well, yes and no, and we continue to be what are known as frenemies with the government. One time we are friends, one time we are enemies, and which is a reflection that it's an up and down kind of setup. As we were leading, let me say, following the military intervention, there was so much good feeling that let us all do things properly post Robert Mugabe. And so there was a real push towards being professional towards journalists. But of course, all rabbits die, and suddenly, as soon as we went into election mode, the true colors of politicians or political parties started coming out. We started hearing a lot of bizarre and ludicrous things coming out of the mouths of politicians. But the spike was when, I think it was the 1st of August, when there was a march in town, I think by the opposition supporters, and quite a lot of journalists were beaten up by people wearing military fatigues. I've heard somewhere that some of them may not have been genuine soldiers, but these people were holding AK-47 guns, which are not available over a supermarket counter. So I'd want to believe they were soldiers. And there was a lot of abuse of our members, of journalists. And before that, there was also an attempt to call off a press conference. But what we found very assuring was that the president or the president-elect made an intervention through his Twitter to say this was unacceptable. And so for us, although there may be remnants or people that may not want to behave properly towards the media, I take comfort, some form of comfort, in the sense that no less than the president-elect tried to make an intervention.
Talking about the president-elect, the access that you have to him, once this drama played out, there was this relationship that he had with all the press. The international media seemed to be writing positively about what's happening in Zimbabwe, and then things changed, particularly when the army started shooting people in the streets. And I just wonder, when we saw the president speak to the media, he began with the international media. We didn't see him so much on the local media initially. Tell us a little bit about access and his speaking to the international media often first.
Well, thank you. He actually has been a regular guest of the union in his previous life as a Minister of Justice. In fact, he even came up with suggestions on how to self-regulate. You know, it's talking about how the media needed to self-regulate. This was when he was a minister. Even when he was Vice President, he attended one of our events. And so I think the things developed very fast, but we do hope that he will continue to avail himself, assuming he continues after the court challenge, because more often than not, as you are pointing out, it is the trend with African leaders that they avail themselves to international media, New York Times, as if Zimbabweans or South Africans or Ugandans read the New York Times in large numbers. So certainly one of the things that we want to encourage African leaders is that they also need to be available to the local media, which is consumed by their local people, because you can make a very good guest to Americans and the British and Australians without your own people accessing or knowing you. So one of the things that we hope we will be able to get from whoever emerges as the leader of Zimbabwe is that you need to be accessible to the local media, because those are the people who are carrying your message to your voters.
Okay. We've run out of time, but very quick question for you, Patience. Democracy, one of the pillars is a good and functioning media. Do you think journalism in Zimbabwe is helping deliver the democratic project?
Yes, I believe that it is, although I still believe that we really need to have a more diverse media, which is one of the biggest challenges that we have in Zimbabwe. We have very limited diversity, with the state having overly too much control around the media, and in terms of ownership, control, etc. So this, for me, I think is a big challenge, and the more diverse and more independent the media is, the better our democracy is going to be.
To both of you, thanks very much indeed for joining me. Patience Zirima, Director at Media Monitor Zimbabwe, and Foster Ndlovu, Secretary General, Zimbabwe Union of Journalists. Thank you both for your time.
It was a pleasure.
All right, okay, so that's where we're going to leave our coverage for this morning on Media Monitor here in Harare in Zimbabwe. So interesting developments taking place in the media space, a very important pillar for the democracy of the country to flourish, and it looks as if we're moving towards the right direction here, but we'll keep a monitor of the situation here. But in the meantime, we go back to you, Bongi.
Thank you very much, Peter. Media Monitor in Harare. Media Monitor here in Johannesburg. We'll be talking to Glenda Daniels shortly, and Lisa Vetten as well. Coming up next.
Oza, come here, man. This place is looking a mess.
Boss, you holding the plans upside down.
Don't talk back. Lamba, you fired.
Unfair dismissal. Let Clientele Legal tackle your labor issues for you. We have tough, professional lawyers standing by to assist you 24 hours a day. SMS DEFEND to 32281 and we'll call you back. SMS now.
I always say entrepreneurship are those that see opportunities where others don't.
You can't give me a bad deal. You can't cheat me. Because I'll read my own contract. I know what's going on in my contract. But I've never been afraid of a challenge. I'm one of those people.
I didn't know the difference between my money and the business money. Whatever money that came in used to be your money. You'd go shopping, driving all these cars, and we were forgetting to pay creditors.
If we're more diligent with how we utilize our money.
So the great thing with this and my other job, being an advocate, is that in both industries, I sort of own my time.
Today, we're doing inner city buildings, we're doing commercial projects, and we're doing property development even within the township scale, and even now going to the next end of now even establishing offices in the States to be able to raise capital to invest in Africa.
Keep it locked to Bupilong every Saturday at 5:30.
Welcome back. We now continue with the discussion about